Sweet. Hey everybody. My name's Adam Hutchison. I'm a physical therapist writing for the Undroppables. I really want to give a shout out to Space Ghost Force and his entire team for having me on here. I'm really excited to be here. I listen to a lot of these shows, so to be on the other side of this is a little bit surreal. But yeah, I think we're going to have a good time. We got a lot of good questions. I'm going to try to get through as many as I possibly can here to answer your guys' questions that were nice enough to ask them. So I think we'll just, without further ado, just hop right in this and get in the show. So first question we got from JMan1406 says, I've got Debo on my team everywhere. How many games is he likely to play? Is he likely to be at full effectiveness this year? So this is a good question, JMan. And I have a ton of Debo myself in Dynasty, and I was pretty bummed out by the news. For the first part of your question, how many games do I expect him to miss? I don't know if I have a perfect answer for that. I think there's a decent chance that he's out all of September based on some of the news that I've seen out there. You know, I wrote about this on the Undroppables site, and I talked about how at the 5 to 6 week mark, I wanted to start seeing Debo run and move around a little bit. And instead of that, we got a report from the 49ers, John Lynch, saying that he wouldn't be surprised or he expected that Debo was going to miss a couple games. We just saw a video surface not too long ago of him moving around a little bit, but that's more closer to that 7-8 week mark. So I think there's a good chance that if he misses all of September, that's 3 games. Depending on how he's doing later on in his recovery, I think there's a decent chance. I wouldn't call it a sure thing, but I think there's a decent chance that he maybe starts on the PUP to start the season, which would mean a minimum of 6 games missed if the season starts on time. And that's a big if. We don't know how COVID-19 is going to affect anything, if the NFL is going to start on time. I'm planning as if it is. And if it does, then I would expect him to miss somewhere in that 3 to 6 ballpark range of games. I don't think, to answer the second part of your question, is he likely to be at full effectiveness? I don't think we're going to get to see the Debo that we were expecting to see in 2020. He might have some big games, I think, here and there, but his injury could linger a little bit based on where he's had it and depending on the hardware that he's got in his foot. So I would just take it with a grain of salt this year with Debo. Like I said, I'm a big fan of Debo. I have him in a couple of dynasty leagues. My main dynasty league that I play in, I have him in. So the injury was not great, but I think he's definitely going to play this year. What we get out of him, but just be cautious and understand. And if he has not a great year, I think I'll be there in 2021 to buy him on the bounce back. All right, next question I got here is from Tart. Is T.Y. Hilton's injury history a cause for concern this season? So I will say yes, just because he's had some recurrent issues here with the hamstring injuries. The severity of those injuries, I think, varies, and you need to take that in consideration. I think for T.Y. Hilton, he's a veteran here. He's dealt with these issues before. So he's come out recently and said that he's going to be ready for the season and he's ready to go. And I'm inclined to believe that, but I'm definitely going to be watching out for his injury history, and I wouldn't be surprised if this hamstring thing pops up again. The research has shown ranges vary, but with hamstring strains, the recurrence rates is somewhere between 40 to 50%. So that's fairly high, but there's a lot that goes into hamstring strains. It's common for scar tissue to build up in that area. There's some research about neurodynamics and things like that go into preventing those injuries. If he stays healthy, I wouldn't be shocked either, but it's something that I think could pop up. And like I said, based on his past injury history, I wouldn't be shocked if it pops up again. He's had a couple of these that in recent years. On to the next one here. Dom FFL. Yes. Where does Rondale Moore fall in your 2020 rankings now that he is an opt-out? Oh, boy. Dom is hitting me below the belt a little bit. If you guys don't know, I'm a Purdue University graduate. I'm a big Boilermaker fan, a big Boilermaker football fan. So the fact that Rondale Moore opted out before the Big Ten actually pushed their season back in the fall was a big blow for me. That one hurt a little bit, Dom. But yeah, in terms of Rondale Moore, he's still my wide receiver run, and I'm biased. Probably, I don't really care. I love watching this guy. I knew from the very get-go, first game I saw him play, that he was going to be special. And the reason that I really like Rondale Moore, and if I'm just putting my Purdue bias aside, I've talked about this a little bit just in terms of my profession as a physical therapist and watching how different athletes move and just respecting different body types and things like that. I'm seeming to notice this trend with a certain kind of wide receiver, these kind of yoked up running back, built like a boulder wide receivers. I'm talking about guys like DJ Moore, AJ Brown recently, Deebo Samuel, Jalen Reagor in this past class, Laviska Shenault in this class as well. I think Rondale Moore is a mini version of those guys, which has got me really excited. So I know there's some good guys in the 2020 class. You got Jamar Chase, Rashad Bateman, Wallace out of Oklahoma State. But Rondale Moore is different to me. And if you guys want to go look at some Rondale Moore highlights, the Ohio State game, that's all Rondale Moore highlights. And he is, like I said, with some of those bigger guys, those yak wide receivers. If you watch that game against defenders from Ohio State that were first, second, third round picks later on, he's breaking tackles, he's running through guys. He's just a different specimen of an athlete. There's videos of him on Twitter. You can watch him squatting over 600 pounds. If you don't know Rondale Moore's build, he's like 5'8" on a good day. He's not the biggest guy, but he's thick, he's sturdy. I think it's also pretty interesting the play that he got injured on last year. I was for certain that he tore his ACL. The fact that he didn't, I think, is a testament to just how much of a freak athlete he is, how big his quads are, how meaty his hamstrings are. I threw my phone when it happened. I told my fiance, I said, "That's it. He just tore his ACL. He's done for the year." But the fact that he didn't is freakish, and I think isn't talked about enough. So, yeah, Rondale Moore, wide receiver one. Next question I got here is from Sam. Sam writes, a year ago, Gurley's knee and his expected limited snap count was all the talk. He played 15 games, was fifth among running backs in team snap percentage, and managed a solid finish at RB14 in PPR, despite poor O-line play. Do you expect his health to hold up in Atlanta, or should we plan on his knee bothering him more? He also writes, are there any specific injuries you see a player suffer that makes you avoid them, like the plague in the future? Or on the other hand, are there any that are seen as bad, but you don't think will affect them in their future play? Okay, we got a lot going on there, Sam. So I'll start with the first part about Todd Gurley. And I just talked about this on Twitter today about Todd Gurley. So if we're going back a year ago, Gurley's knee resulted towards the end of the season, him having a limited snap count. And I'm trying to think what year that was. It was towards the end of 2018. He had knee discomfort. He sat out weeks 16 or 17, which for most fantasy football leagues, week 16 is the fantasy football championship. So if you had him on your team, that was a big ouchie. In 2019, he had some quadricep strain, which I think is related to some of the knee issues that he's developed over time. And then the big thing for me was this offseason in 2020, The Rams have a really good medical staff. Like I've talked about this before. I follow a couple of their guys on their medical staff just because they're really good. The fact that the way they were able to get Cooper Kupp back so quickly and ready to go in 2019, I thought was super impressive and something I wasn't really anticipating. So they've got a really good medical staff there in Los Angeles. And they had a firsthand look at him behind the scenes. And I'm sure they had this meeting with management, but they ultimately decided to let Gurley just flat out walk. And that was a huge hit to their cap. So for the team that was looking at him behind the scenes, for them to basically check out and say, you know what, we're good, we're going to let you walk despite what you're going to cost us in the cap, I thought was everything I needed to know. There's some issues there. And I don't know when Todd Gurley is going to have, when he falls off. It might not be this year. It might not. But I think the writing's on the wall. There's enough of a concern, and I'm starting to see a pattern with him reading in between the lines that I think there's something going on. And we just had a report come out today that the Falcons are limiting his workload. Now, that's not a big deal for the offseason because he's a veteran and they want him to be fresh, but look at Todd Gurley's deal with the Falcons. It's very, front heavy in terms of payment. He's not way that they signed him to that deal. It's not designed to be a long-term deal. So I think they have every incentive to essentially run him into the ground. Now, people can disagree with that. And I've talked to some different people that have a different opinion of that, which I respect and I think is fair. But from my point of view, I don't know why you would pay all that money to Todd Gurley and have it be front heavy, not to use him this year. Why you would? So the argument is that they're going to manage his workload. Well, if they're going to manage his workload, you're not going to get the Todd Gurley that you're expecting to get. You could see him lose goal line touches to Brian Hill or, PPR or third down work in PPR leagues to Ito Smith. So you're not going to be happy with that either. So I've got enough concerns about Todd Gurley that I would be willing to take him in the third or fourth round of, redraft fantasy leagues, but he's not going there. So he's going in the second round. And there's enough guys are going around him that I would rather pivot and go in a different direction. So your second question here, we're talking about specific injuries. I think context is everything with that. So these are very vague, but recurrent soft tissue injuries, a player with a concussion history, multiple concussions, stuff that everyone kind of knows about. Recurrent ACL tears are never good. I specifically try to avoid players the year after their ACL repair, just because I think there's a lot that goes on biomechanically at the knee. You see a lot of hamstring strains the year after an ACL repair, and that's because the biomechanics of the knee have been altered. So those are some things that I look for when I'm talking about, maybe players that I'm avoiding, but I would need to know more of the context about the specific player. That's not just a straight rule that I wouldn't necessarily follow. All right. Next question from Moncal. An NCAA study found an increased rate of ACL and PCL injuries, and an NFL study found an increase in occurrence in ACL eversion ankle sprains on artificial turf. Do you think field turf is enough of a factor to sway your opinion on specific players? In particular, players with previous related injuries who are scheduled to play frequently on artificial turf this year. That was a very well-researched question there, Moncal. I think it's smart, and there definitely is evidence. I've seen some of that evidence that talks about artificial turf. It's somewhat controversial, I think, in some instances, and can be weighed on a little bit too heavily. I don't think it's as cut and dry as have artificial turf, you're more likely to sprain your ankle or tear your ACL. If any of you guys have watched Last Chance U on Netflix, there's a lot of research that goes into artificial turf. So I think it was either second or third season, Independence, they got an artificial turf from the Baltimore Ravens because it was cut too thin. Okay. And they wanted a specific thickness. I think it was like half a centimeter or a quarter of a centimeter off. There's a ton of research that goes into artificial turf. So these teams are aware of these studies. They're researching the thickness, obviously, the type and things like that. I'm not going to fade a player if he's had an ACL tear like a Todd Gurley, who's playing on turf in Atlanta. It's an interesting point, but I don't think it's significant enough to cause you, myself, or anybody to avoid that player. All right. Moving along here. Next question. Gurnals. Evan Ingram. Yay or snag or nah? Okay. He had a bad Liz Frank issue, which might make players hesitant to grab him. And then he also wrote, we know that Corey Davis had a lingering turf toe issue last year. He's not a fantastic player. How do you see him doing this year post-surgery? So let's talk about Evan Ingram first there, because I think that's a good question. I've talked a lot about Evan Ingram and his injury history. In terms of the Liz Frank, I'm avoiding Evan Ingram. I don't think we're going to get the Evan Ingram that we were used to seeing in terms of an explosive tight end. Research that I've looked at is after a Liz Frank surgery, players have about a decrease around 21% of their normal ball production. Okay, so if we're looking at Evan Ingram, and it also gives you, the research also shows you, and things that I've looked at, what's the likelihood that player plays a full slate of games. So from looking at Evan Ingram, I think there's about a 30% chance that he plays all 16 games, which I don't think he's ever done in his career, if I'm correct there. I have him around a 40% chance that he plays somewhere between 14 games. I think it's more likely that he plays somewhere around 12 to 13 games. Okay, so if you're drafting a tight end and you already know that there's a 90% chance that he's only going to be playing around 12 to 13 games, that's going to diminish it as well. And then if we just look over his career at his fantasy football production and take away 21% of that, roughly, based on the research data for Liz Frank injuries, I think you're looking at him scoring under 10 PPR points per game, which, if we look at the past 3 seasons for tight ends, that's going to put him around tight end 11 to 16. Not bad, but it's not why you're drafting Evan Ingram, especially investing a high draft capital in him. So for those reasons, I'm more likely to pivot to another player. I've drafted Evan Ingram in some best ball leagues and things like that, but it came at a significant discount, and I had, it depends on roster construction. So I'm not saying avoid him. He might play all 16 games. He might really shock us, but the research is against him, and it's enough of a reason to fade him at his current ADP. In regards to Corey Davis with the turf toe, I mean, it's certainly not a good thing. Potential injury for him based on his struggles. I wasn't really drafting Corey Davis, and when you pile on an injury that could be limiting him more than his skills have really been limiting him, it's enough for I'm not drafting him. I think he's kind of undraftable. I mean, he's worth a dart throw. You can get him for cheap with your last pick, but why not just wait he's going to be on the waiver wire. Why not just wait and see what he does and pick him up if he has gets off to a good start. Okay, John, I think that's Snow. I'm sorry if I messed your guys' names up. I apologize. He writes, how much of Alvin Kamara's underwhelming season last year do you attribute to him being banged up? He seemed like a completely different player than the previous 2 years. And he also writes, would you consider sportsinjurypredictor.com a reliable source for info? I ask because AJG, who is younger. I'm assuming that's Antonio Gandy Golden. Yeah, maybe. Who is younger and has suffered less frequent and less severe injuries than Emmanuel Sanders, is given a much higher injury risk than Sanders, who suffered 8 pedal injuries alone. Okay, so let's talk about the Alvin Kamara stuff first, because I think that's important. Alvin Kamara had a lot of different injuries going on. It sounds like he had some knee issues. It sounds like he had some back issues. AJ Green. Thank you. Space Ghost Force. Yeah, I just saw that. Okay, so not AJ Green compared to Emmanuel Sanders. Okay. So when we're talking about Alvin Kamara, he had a couple of different injuries last year. One that I focused in on from looking at, because I've seen a lot of this stuff in running back specifically, is high ankle sprains. And my sample size is a little bit limited, but I've pulled over the last couple, I think 5 to 7 years of looking at high ankle sprains in running backs. And on average, when those running backs return, they average 3.2 less points per game, standard deviation of around 6. So somewhere between 3 to 9 points less per game than when they were playing healthy. Which doesn't sound like a lot, but if a guy is, even if it's 3 points, if a guy's averaging less than 3 less points per game, that drops him. That's enough to drop him from an RB1, averaging 18 points a game, down to an RB2, maybe averaging 10 to 12 points per game. So it's significant. And Kamara saw that dip last year. His wasn't as significant, but I think around 2 points per game less after he returned after the high ankle sprain. You compile that with now the knee issues that he was talking about, and potentially some back issues. So yeah, I think it had a lot to do with Alvin Kamara's underwhelming season. I think he's not really a discount. He's still a first round pick, but I'm not fading him because he underperformed last year. I think taking that context matters a lot. So that's pretty astute of you to pick that up. And for your next question, okay, so when we're talking about sportsinjurypredictor.com, I can't really speak to I know they give out values for how much of an injury risk a player is. And I can't speak to where those specific values come from. I don't know if it's player specific. They're just looking at injury history and saying based on how many games this guy's played in the past, this is how many games we're going to project him to play in the future. Or if they're looking at a larger data set and saying, of a wide receiver that's this age and has had these type of injuries based to a healthy population, they play X amount of games fewer. So I don't really know where they're getting that stuff from, but I think it's a reliable source. Their injuries are pretty accurate. Sometimes I've looked at some of their lists in the past, and it's not an exhaustive list of all their injuries. Sometimes there's some stuff missing from there. But I think you can look at it. So I don't know where their values come from. I think I would also take that with a grain of salt. It shouldn't be the end all be all, but they obviously have some research and some science that's going into why they're saying that a player will miss a certain amount of games. So I think it's useful for sure. Alrighty. Next question here. From the OG Space Ghost Force. Hey, I want to give a big shout out again to Space Ghost Force for having me on here. Really appreciate it. He says, at what point do we need to consider Cook's and Will Fuller's concussion history a deal breaker for drafting them? So I think a lot of that has to do with how you've constructed your team. I talked about Brandon Cooks a lot. I wrote an article about his concussion history on the Undroppables website, theundroppables.com. I want to give a big shout out to those guys. I appreciate being a part of their team and Chalk for setting everything up. We got a new website. If you guys haven't seen that, definitely check that out. Had to get that plug in there. But getting back to Brandon Cooks, I think my fear for Cooks is that his next concussion could result, or he could potentially walk away. The research has shown that if you've suffered more than 3 concussions in a close period of time, like Brandon Cooks has, that you're 3 times more likely to suffer another concussion. Looking back through 2017, the average concussion rate for just a healthy player is around 8%. Okay. So if we know that Brandon Cooks now has had, I think, 5, if I remember correctly, in recent years, then you're looking at a player that's at a 24 to 25% chance of suffering a concussion. And we know that he's had some serious issues, so much so that he had to go to a specialist in Pittsburgh to get some help with his concussions. He's at a higher likelihood of getting concussions. The next one could be potentially serious and cause him to miss some multiple weeks, or who's to say for his quality of health, he just says, this isn't for me, I'm over this. So I'm more worried about Brandon Cooks for sure. Fuller, I think you've got to it's pretty much baked into his ADP at this point. You know that he's going to miss some games for some hamstring issues. And he recently just came out and said that he's been working on a lot of stuff, posturing. I think if I remember reading it, he even talked about neurodynamics. I don't want to get too nerdy into some of that, but that's important for hamstring strains. There's a lot that goes on with those hamstring strains in terms of the scar tissue that can just build up in that muscle belly, deteriorate the muscle, put some pressure on the nerves that pass through those muscles, increase the likelihood of having those injuries. For me, last year he was a fade because he was coming off that ACL tear. And I talked about how hamstring strains are common the year after an ACL tear. Fuller has had problems with, injuring his hamstring before then. He has an ACL tear, go figure. He has another hamstring injury that causes him to miss time. I think when he plays, he's great. And he has a lesser target competition this year around. Even if Brandon Cooks is healthy, he's no DeAndre Hopkins. So I'm more inclined to draft Will Fuller than I am Brandon Cooks. But I also think that need to consider Randall Cobb. I was considering Kenny Stills because I think that he would fall into that Will Fuller role more naturally. But there's reports that Kenny Stills is out of shape, reporting to camp. So Randall Cobb could be a screaming value late in drafts because there's a possibility week 8 or 9, he's the only healthy wide receiver on the team. Alrighty, moving along. On Callaghan, he asked, have you been able to identify the exact hit that birthed the legend we know as Mr. Unlimited? I think you're talking about Russell Wilson. I had to ask some of the guys here who Mr. Unlimited was. I must have been living under a rock or something because I didn't know who that was at first. But I think we're talking about Russell Wilson, so I'm going to run with that. Yeah, okay, I just got confirmation we were talking about Russell Wilson here. Okay, so I don't know the exact hit. It sounds like he's got some strange behavior going on, but I think what is interesting about Russell Wilson is I've been looking at mobile quarterbacks, specifically, the Konami code type quarterbacks that run a lot from last year with about 40 or 50 rushes or more. And Russell Wilson was one of the first quarterbacks that I looked at. And his hit rate on some of his runs was actually pretty low compared to some other quarterbacks. It was around 62%, which I know seems high, but honestly, when looking at some of the other guys, they take bigger hits and more frequent hits. So that I found that a little bit surprising. He seems to get out of bounds or slide a lot. I will say on some of those hits, and this is subjective, and I'll talk about this. This is kind of behind the scenes stuff that I'm giving you guys here because this is a little project that I've been working on for a little bit, just looking at quarterback durability for the running quarterbacks. But on some of his runs, he seemed to take bigger hits, and I quantify that as if he's leveled, he has a hit to the head, somebody lands with their full amount of weight on him. His big hit rate was around 14.5%. So a lot of this data is preliminary, but when I compared him to other quarterbacks, he was actually one of the more safer options, him and Kyler Murray, compared to guys like Carson Wentz and Josh Allen. I'm still working on Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson's kind of been a haul because that dude ran it like 175 times last year, so I'm not done with his data. But Russell Wilson is actually one of the safer quarterbacks, despite, I guess, he took a big hit and now he's acting a little strange and calling himself Mr. Unlimited or whatnot. All right, moving on here. Roderick Moore. Is it fair to say that players who suffer a significant ankle injury will be more hobbled the rest of the season, even if they start playing again? Example, N'Keal Harry. So I haven't looked at it specifically in wide receivers, but I talked about this a little bit with the high ankle sprain in terms of Alvin Kamara. So I think, yeah, there is data to suggest that these ankle sprains, that I know I was looking specifically at high ankle sprains, but any ankle sprains, those players come back, especially explosive players and skill position players like running back and wide receiver, average fewer points per game. I haven't looked at wide receivers. I'm sure that played a factor in N'Keal Harry's progression. New England seems like they have a pretty strict standard in terms of what they expect from players, even in their rookie years. I mean, Damian Harris hardly saw the field last year for some odd reason, even though he was pretty good at Alabama. So I think there is data. I don't have the specific numbers. I haven't looked at wide receivers specifically, but certainly could factor into N'Keal Harry and other players as well. Space Ghost Force again writes, Sony Michel currently on the PUP. Would you consider him a viable fantasy asset, or is his injury history a yikes for drafting him on your team? So I talked a little bit. This is a nice segue here for the New England backfield. Yeah, Sony Michel is a yikes for me. It seems like every offseason he's got to have a surgery or something to correct. So this may be one of those. I've gotten some questions earlier about, are there specific players or situations you avoid? This might be one of those situations. It sounds like Sony Michel's got some issues going on where he's suffering multiple, ligament and soft tissue injuries, and it's becoming a history. There might just be, he might just be a player that's more predisposed to those type of injuries. I'm pretty much done with Sony. I mean, during this whole quarantine thing, there hasn't been a lot of stuff on television, certainly not a lot of sports until the NBA bubble and MLB got growing. But I was, bored and watching some stuff on ESPN. And one of the things I watched was, Sony Michel from a couple years back in the college football playoffs and national championship. He looked like a different player than the Sony Michel that, I've seen the last 2 years in the NFL, specifically last year. He doesn't look like the same player. He doesn't look nearly as explosive. I'm wondering if some of those injuries are lingering and causing some issues. I got into a debate with somebody recently on Twitter about Damian Harris, and I thought that he would be a value, and that was pre-Lamar Miller signing. That wasn't really the point. The point is I'm hating Sony Michel, so I don't care what running back. Damian Harris in the 12th round, James White in the 7th round. I don't really know what Lamar Miller's ADP is at this point, since his news is fairly recent, but all those guys are worth a dart throw. I'm just going to take the one that's the latest, and it might be Lamar Miller or it might be Damian Harris, depending on how I construct my team. But I think those guys are values, and they cost the cheapest. Clearly, James White is the most established among that backfield, but he has the highest price tag. And he seems to be more of a third down back as opposed to between the tackles grinder type back. Someone like a Damian Harris or maybe even a Lamar Miller could fill in for Sony Michel. So those are guys that I'm certainly looking at. Space Ghost Force also writes, Jarvis Landry, the epitome of a wide receiver 2 last year with his hip injury. Did you see him fall from his usual form, or can we trust him to return to his former self? So Jarvis Landry, I mean, it wasn't spectacular, but he certainly had a good year last year. I'm not fading Jarvis Landry because of his hip. I'm not worried about that. He's a freak. He's a special player. He knows how to get open. This is off topic from injury stuff, but I wrote an article a couple months back for the Fantasy Champions, just because I was looking at snap counts and things like that and coaching changes. And I think something that's interesting when looking at Jarvis Landry is what the scheme fit will be with Kevin Stefanski. So over his entire career, of all the fantasy points that Jarvis Landry has gotten, 63% of them have come when he's lined up in the slot. And that's significant because it seems like Kevin Stefanski, from what he's used in Minnesota and what we anticipate him to use in Cleveland, is he likes to use a lot of heavy 12 personnel, 2 tight ends. That's why they, went out and signed Austin Hooper and paid him a lot of money. It's why they're insistent on keeping David Njoku. They want to play a tight bunch formation and not let you necessarily know what they're going to do on any individual play, run or pass. So that's significant because Adam Thielen had some injuries last year, but his slot snap percentage dropped from 46.7% in 2018 to 29% in 2019. So if we're kind of forecasting that for Jarvis Landry, we know that the majority of his fantasy football points come when he's lined up in the slot, 63% to be exact. If he doesn't, is that going to have an effect on him? It could. He's a good enough player that he could certainly rise above it, but that would be something that I would be monitoring is he lining up more outside, not necessarily his hip injury, because he kind of persevered through that. And, if he had a little bit of a dip in his production, I think it's fair to attribute that to his hip injury, but he seemed to push through that. And not a lot of, I certainly didn't know he had it during the season. It was more that we found out about it during the off season. All right. Dom FFL writes in again. I don't know if I want to answer his question after he maybe talk about my boy Rondale Moore, but I'll do it, I guess, for you, Dom. Any weight into the old college tread running back argument for running back? So I'm assuming basically running backs that are older and have more snaps. Is there anything that goes into them being more at risk for injury or sooner fall off? I haven't seen anything like that. If anything, it might be the opposite of that. This is also a side project that I'm looking on, but specifically running backs in Power 5 conferences that have a higher workload, I think specifically in the short term, are more durable, less likely to get injured. So I don't think there's anything to that anyway, at least on some of the preliminary stuff that I've looked at and I've seen other people talk about. You could even make the argument that it's more of the opposite. All right, we got a really good question here. Blake Hampton, my old buddy, Blake, writes, who is your number one kicker this year? And would you stack kicker and defense? All right, well, for kickers, I like to use the name model, which is essentially they have a fun name. I draft them. So I like Harrison Buckner just because it's fun to say. So he would probably be my number one kicker this year based on that model. And then stacking kicker and defenses, I think that's pretty much straightforward. I mean, if you're not stacking kickers and defenses, you're trying to lose. You're not even trying. So I'm disappointed, Blake, because I thought you would have known better. You always stack kicker and defenses. Everybody knows that, man. All right. Getting back to some injury talk here. I've got Moncal again. We see a lot of players get the label of injury prone, regardless of the type of injuries they've received. Are there any injuries in particular that cause a higher risk of injury later on? Are there any injuries you don't worry about recurring in the future? I think we kind of talked about that. I mean, that's a fair point, because that's a question I get a lot about in terms of injury prone and, are players injury prone or what injuries are the worst? It's a lot of context. We talked about, the recurrent hamstring, soft tissue injuries are something. Concussions are a big one. ACL, multiple ones like that. So those would be more of those. The injury prone label, it's a hot debate. I mean, I could probably get on my soapbox here for an hour and just talk about that in different phases. I know a lot of people have voices out there saying there aren't players that are injury prone, and I agree with that for the most part. I think there are some players that are just, for whatever reason, anatomy, genetics are built a little bit differently, and for some reason are subject to more soft tissue injuries. Tyler Eifert, seems like Sony Michel. It's too early to tell. This year will be very telling. For whatever reason, James Conner, and I know it's a hot button topic, but James Conner seems to be like one of those players that he's just had, multiple injuries over multiple parts of his body that start to add up and affect him in some way. So I think there is something to that, but by the time we find out, it's usually too late because you need enough data before you're going to slap that label on somebody. All right, I got a question from Chalk here. I got to answer that. He's technically my boss, and I'm a company man. So, thoughts on Rashad Penny and chances of contributing to fantasy football teams in 2020? Will he need a full year to be as explosive as before? And he also wrote, following up on the Gurley questions above, will the turf in the Atlanta Dome affect Gurley's knees at all? There's research, so I'll just answer the Gurley one because we talked a lot about that turf and unofficial turf. There's research that suggests it. I think if you're making an argument against Gurley, it's good to pile that on there, saying, and there's this. Seems to be a lot of things working against Gurley. If I had to prioritize them, this would be at the very bottom of the list in terms of the turf. Like I said, there's research that shows it. Moncal brought up those studies that talked about it. So it's out there. But again, priority-wise, not super high. Talking about Rashad Penny, though. So, contributing for fantasy football teams. Okay. We all saw, a lot of us saw the workout videos, the Instagram videos that seem to be all the rave this offseason from players coming back from injuries. So Rashad Penny, I think when we saw those videos of him doing the agility ladder, that's exactly where I would expect him to be. There's research out there that shows that if a player comes back 9 months, sooner than 9 months after an ACL tear, his chances of re-injuring or having another injury go up, increase by sevenfold. That's a lot. And then the research also shows that your injury risk was significantly lower if you return 9 months after an ACL injury. The average of those players and those athletes that return 9 months after was about 11 months out. Okay. Rashad Penny, again, I have to clarify this. Assuming the season starts on time, Rashad Penny is going to be literally right at that 9-month mark for his ACL tear. Seahawks medical staff, they're a lot smarter than me. They know this. They know what they're dealing at with Rashad Penny. I think you need to look at what they did. And back in June, they went and signed Carlos Hyde, which to me is a flare shooting off in the sky signaling saying, hey, we're not going to rush Rashad Penny. We invested first-round draft capital on Rashad Penny. That's becoming a rarity. Teams don't do that. We need to see what we've got in this guy before we make a deal one way or the other because Chris Carson's about to be a free agent. We need to see, is Rashad Penny our dude or is he not? Let's make sure he's 100% healthy. I think he's going to start on the PUP. And I think they're going to give him every opportunity to come back as healthy as he can before they put him out there. So will he need a full year to be as explosive before? Probably. But I think he could contribute in 2020. It's just going to be later in the season. And I think he has potential. And I use this carefully because people say this a lot on Twitter. I think Rashad Penny has potential to be a league winner because I think there's a chance around week 12, 13, 14 that he's going to be sitting on waiver wires and you can pick him up because he might be picking up a full head of steam by that point and really getting it going. I think Seattle takes it easy with him, so I wouldn't hold my breath for the beginning of the year. At my level, right, do you think J.K. Dobbins will have an impactful rookie season? We know the talent is there, but obviously Mark Ingram is there. How do you feel about him this upcoming season? So for J.K. Dobbins, talking about durability and everything like that, besides suspension, Mark Ingram's been one of the most durable running backs in the NFL. You'll be hard-pressed to find an issue in terms of Mark Ingram's resume in terms of playing time. Now, he had that suspension for I'm assuming, using steroids or some type of illegal substances, if I remember correctly. But Mark Ingram's solid. He's sturdy. I don't think he's going anywhere. So unless he does get injured, I don't know how impactful J.K. Dobbins is going to have. Everyone likes J.K. Dobbins. I like J.K. Dobbins. Clearly, the Ravens like J.K. Dobbins, but I think they probably cannibalize each other this year because I don't see Mark Ingram going anywhere, especially if he's giving up, 20, 25% of his snaps to J.K. Dobbins. He's been sturdy and durable. He's not going to go anywhere if he's getting a lesser workload. Not My Level also writes, how do you feel on Jalen Reagor? A lot of positive things. While yes, he has a ton of competition his rookie season, they're all injury prone in a way. You see him being a high level wide receiver too. We know Philly wants to throw the ball, and Wentz is great at doing that. Yeah. So I talk about Jalen Reagor in terms of those yak bulked up wide receivers that I like, and he's one of those guys. And I talked about Evan Ingram in terms of Liz Frank injury. Alshon Jeffrey has that exact same injury, and Alshon Jeffrey is like 6 years older than Evan Ingram. So any concerns I have over an Evan Ingram, you can multiply those tenfold for Alshon Jeffrey. I don't think we're going to see a lot of Alshon Jeffrey this year, and Deshaun Jackson's had some issues. But even if Jalen Reagor can slot into the Alshon Jeffrey role, I think he's gonna have a big year. Everyone's worried about how COVID's going to affect the offseason or whatnot. My two favorite rookie wide receivers, just based on body type, are Jalen Reagor and Laviska Shenault, because I think those guys don't need a significant, elaborate route tree. You can run bubble screens for them, you can run slants for them, and just get the ball in their hands and let them do the rest. Jalen Reagor's that type, Laviska Shenault's that type. So I think Jalen Reagor is, if I'm drafting a rookie wide receiver in redraft leagues, it's going to be Jalen Reagor. Tart writes, does Lamar Jackson's run frequency concern you as far as injuries go? So I kind of talked about this. That's a project I'm working on. Tart, I will have more information for you. You're definitely going to want to follow the Undroppables on Instagram, Twitter, check their website, do whatever you can, because I'm going to have more information on that in terms of, is he getting hit a lot? How's he compared to players like Russell Wilson and Kyler Murray? So I will answer that in the future for you, my friend. Just tune in, and we'll get that content out there. Marcus Combe, I think that's right, says, does the Giants' weapons injury history turn you on or off to any specific member? Yeah, Golden Tate, I think, because of Evan Ingram operating as a tight end in the middle of the field. If he's not healthy, I think a lot of those targets could go to Golden Tate. Sterling Shepard has a pretty extensive concussion history and has struggled, with health as well. So for me, I mean, I was kind of surprised that there's a lot of hype around Darius Slayton this offseason. So I don't know if he is a value. I know specifically Golden Tate is. Golden Tate's pretty much slept on, and everyone thinks he's dust. But he's a pretty good slot wide receiver, and he operates, well in the middle of the field. And he's actually, he's not as big as some of those guys, but I think even last year had a lot of yards after the catch. So if Evan Ingram goes down, I think Golden Tate's the one that could benefit from that the most. Sorry. All right. Space Ghost Force. Is there any chance Alex Smith could return, or is he beyond the realm of saving? I like that story about Alex Smith. This is uncharted territory. I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, it's been a long journey thus far, and I don't think so. That was a pretty significant injury, and if you watch the E60 on him, he had a nasty infection. I mean, there's a lot of complex things that are going on there, even above my pay grade, that I think getting back to football would be modest. Ghost Force also writes, the curious case of James Conner. Any idea to what sort of risk we can associate with him? Or would you consider him a bounce back candidate this season? Given his injury history plus ADP values, where do you draft Hunter Henry? Okay, so we got a couple things there with James Conner and Hunter Henry. I talked about James Conner essentially being kind of one of those injury prone players. I think, I don't want to comment on it too much because I don't have any information behind the scenes. I think there's something with James Conner that predisposes him to injury. And then this isn't objective at all. This is very subjective. But when you watch James Conner play, in my opinion, he kind of seems like he's a running back that opens himself up for big hits. Sometimes he's kind of rumbling and stumbling through the hole, and he's not as agile as some a Dalvin Cook type running back. So that's another thing that could be weighing against him. I'm nitpicking here. You could find 10 reasons why to like James Conner. You could find 10 reasons not to like him. He's a running back, and he plays on a team that typically uses one running back. I think the Steelers are a little bit concerned. They've invested, especially as of late, some draft capital in some running backs. Benny Snell, Anthony McFarland this year. So he could be a bounce back candidate, but if I'm drafting him, I'm definitely making I'm drafting a robust running back team. I'm getting some running backs on my bench because there's a chance that he could miss some time. Given his injury history plus ADP value, would you draft Hunter Henry? Absolutely. He came really fast. Came back fast from that tibial plateau fracture he suffered last year, a lot faster than I anticipated. He seems good to go. It'd be interesting to see if we could get any footage behind the scenes, Hard Knocks. But when he came back last year, he was fine. He was good. So I'm not worried about Hunter Henry. Journals, right. Where did I go? Okay, here we are. The workhorse parable. RBs like Derrick Henry, Nick Chubb, Zeke, Melvin Gordon III are projected to get super high volumes of carries. Which one of those do you think goes down first and why? That is a loaded question. I'm not going to pick any of them because I don't know. I think the reason those guys have super high work volumes is because they can sustain it, and they're built a certain way. And that's why teams pay those guys a lot of money. That's why, Derrick Henry got a lot of money this offseason, and Zeke a couple of years back. And Melvin Gordon should have taken the money that the Chargers were offering him and run, but he got paid somewhat in Denver. It would be a freak thing. There's nothing in their profiles that say they're more injury prone than that. Melvin Gordon has got nicked up here and there, but I don't think that there's anyone there. Which handcuff is the best to take since Gurley's knees are weaker than a house of cards and a hurricane? Gurnals writes as well. So I tried to figure that out myself. I bought into the Brian Hill hype last year. That was an epic fail. Ito Smith, I've never really been impressed with him. He seems to be a better receiving back. The one that's most intriguing to me is Quadri Olison. I was talking, or I wasn't talking to him. I don't know him personally, but I was messaging with Rich Rebar on Twitter because he was talking about it, some similar stuff this morning like myself, and I kind of asked him, I said, well, what about Quadri Olison? And he said he was more of a touchdown-dependent running back. So what that tells me is potentially none of them. Running back, if Gurley goes down, might not even be on the team. There might be a Devonta Freeman homecoming if that happens. I wouldn't rule that out. I'm not reaching for any of those running backs in deep leagues. I would probably stash Olison or Ito Smith in a PPR league, Olison just from a pure upside standpoint because we haven't seen him play. All right, guys, so I'm going to answer a couple more questions here just so we're efficient on time. I'm going to go through here. Let's see. Scrolling the way up here. This is an interesting question. Groundfish said, do you feel like Mark Andrews carries an increased risk because he's a diabetic amongst the COVID-19 pandemic? Enough to fade him at his current ADP. If that dude is playing, then I'm not going to fade him at his current ADP. You don't know what's going to happen with COVID. I think he is at that increased risk because that is a comorbidity for sure. And I tweeted about this. The British Journal of Sports Medicine talked about, return to play protocols, what they suggested for players. And they also talked about players with comorbidities potentially having an increased timeline. So their suggestion was 3 to 4 weeks if you get a positive result before you return to sport. We don't know enough about COVID. We don't know what it does. There's obviously side effects and stuff that's popped up in young people. With Mark Andrews being a diabetic, kind of cardiovascular issues for sure, but there's a chance he never gets it. So I'm not going to fade him as current ADP for that reason. I'd probably fade him for other reasons because I don't draft tight ends that high, but I wouldn't fade him for that reason. Let me see here. We haven't gotten this one. Sam writes, Cam's shoulder, 3 surgeries and as many years or something like that, and then the foot. What are the chances he plays 16 games and is effective enough to lead New England to the playoffs? This is a really good question. I'm more worried about Cam's shoulder just because, like you said, there's been multiple injury history there and some things going on. I tweeted about it. There's a long thread. If you're interested in reading about it, you can go to my Twitter page and look up, type my Twitter handle in parentheses and Cam Newton, and it'll come up. And some other players, some other guys from the Undroppables have written about Cam Newton and that thread in their offseason breakdown of the New England Patriots. But it'll be interesting because I think for Cam, it's going to be like a durability thing, a workload thing. I would like to see the Patriots, rely on their defense, even though they lost a lot of players that opted out because of COVID. Rely on their defense and run the ball a lot and use Cam Newton sparingly because I think his shoulder has shown signs of breaking down. And I've got a couple of interesting video clips in there that you can look at. Healthy Cam Newton, flick of the wrist, and the ball flies 50 yards down the field on a dime. And then there's Cam Newton where he's a really labored, struggling throwing motion. He's underthrowing guys. So those would be things I would be looking at for Cam Newton if I have him. But I think he's a good value. I think he's a good quarterback. I'd take a shot on him. With the foot issues, I don't know how much he'll be running. He's healthy from it, and they should use him. But he's been certainly nicked up enough that I think they're going to want to try to preserve him as best as they possibly can. Okay. I'm going to answer 2 more here, but I know I've answered a couple of his, but I'm going to go back to Gurnall's here because he got me with the Boilermaker hype. He knows me. He says, not exactly a medical related question, but what do you think of Bryson Hopkins since you're a Boilermakers fan? I like Bryson Hopkins. He struggled with drops last year. Player that I compare Bryson Hopkins to is Dawson Knox, and for a couple of reasons. I think they're similar skill sets, similar body types, similar athletic profiles. Okay, and a lot of people like Dawson Knox in Dynasty and advocate for him as a stash. The reason I compare him to Dawson Knox is Dawson Knox flew under the radar in NFL draft. No one knew about him. Well, yeah, duh. He was sharing targets with A.J. Brown and DK Metcalf while I was at Ole Miss. So, yeah, he's going to be third in the pecking order when you're playing with those guys. Not the same caliber yet, but I'm telling you, Rondale Moore is a stud, and they've got another guy there that will be coming out in the class of 2022, David Bell, who is a freaking stud. He is the prototypical wide receiver. The guy catches everything. Bryson Hopkins competed with targets with both of these guys. I think he flew under the radar. He's an athletic tight end. He is a poor man's Travis Kelce type. He's not a good blocking tight end. I'm not saying he's Travis Kelce. He's not a good blocking tight end, but he's a good receiving tight end. I'd be interested in him stashing him in dynasty leagues for the next 2 years because you don't know what's going to happen with Gerald Everett. And the Rams like to use a lot of 2 tight end sets because their offensive line isn't very good. You can see Bryson Hopkins having a pretty nice fantasy role. So I like Bryson Hopkins. I'm biased, but I just laid out the scenario there. He was competing with 2 bona fide studs in college wide receivers. You will know about Rondale Moore and David Bell on Sundays. I'm telling you that. So Bryson Hopkins, I think, is certainly flying under the radar. Last one here. I haven't answered your questions. I haven't seen your name in here. I'm going to butcher it. Tyruzi? What is a realistic expectation this season, assuming that Lazard is the actual wide receiver 2 in Green Bay? Okay. So fun fact about me as well. I'm a Purdue fan, but both my parents went to Iowa State and Ames, Iowa. So I've watched a decent amount of Iowa State football, and that's where I first learned about Allen Lazard. I thought he should have been drafted. He went undrafted. He ended up in Jacksonville, which I live in Jacksonville now. I'm a Chicago native, but I live in Jacksonville. So I actually went to a couple of their practices and things like that and watched a little bit of Allen Lazard. He's a big wide receiver. He's a good player. I think Funchess opting out helps him. Aaron Rodgers seems to be the type of quarterback that if he likes you and he advocates for you, you're going to get the ball. Davante Adams is the one, no doubt. Set it and forget it. They've got a couple of good receiving backs, and obviously Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams as well is pretty capable in that. But Allen Lazard is the other guy, and I don't know, man. This is a subjective take. Pissed off Aaron Rodgers. I want a part of that offense. I think he's upset that the team drafted Jordan Love. I think he's going to be on a mission. So realistic, Allen Lazard. I mean, I don't know. Ceiling, top 30 wide receiver. I don't think is unheard of. I think he is an interesting prospect. He's a solid guy. He doesn't do anything really super spectacular, but he'll go up and battle for the ball at the catch point. He did that a ton at Iowa State. I think he had to because he wasn't a great separator, but he could be a sneaky guy. He's going to be drawing the less of the two DBs when they play off because Davante Adams is going to get the most attention. So Allen Lazard could be a sneaky guy. I think he's worth a late round flyer for sure. Okay, guys, I think that's going to be it. I don't want to take up too much of your guys' time and have this thing be super long. I want to give, again, Space Ghost Force a shout out for having me and his whole team for having me on. It's been a lot of fun. I enjoy doing these things. Make sure if you're not following me on Twitter, you do so at @thereal_Adam_H. But more importantly, guys, Undroppables team members have been awesome. We got a great crew. We got a podcast, the Unscripted podcast, some great personalities on there. We've got, editors and graphic designers and things like that are just absolutely killing it. Obviously, the front of it, Chalk and Term on Twitter, if you're not following those guys. I think what's really nice about the team that we have is we respond, you know what I mean? Like, we're open to having debates and we're open to different opinions, and it's a good crew. It's a very diverse crew, and we have a lot of fun. So definitely make sure that you're following the Undroppables this season and for all your fantasy football content. Can't say enough nice things about those guys. And again, I want to say thank you to Space Ghost Force and all you guys for being here. I hope you guys had a lot of fun and answer some questions. If I didn't get to your question you want to ask me, just tweet at me, slide in my DM, something. I'll be happy to answer stuff. Thanks, guys.